Mixing with Mike plugin of the week is the Sonnox Oxford Drum Gate. This is a plugin that is specifically designed as a gate for drums. And not all gates are designed specifically for drums, although that's sometimes the most obvious use. But what this does is it focuses in the particular characteristics and problems that you have with acoustic drums, where you have bleed between different microphones. So let's do a quick overview of the graphic user interface, go through the basic setup and settings, and then dig right into how to use it and why some of the features, or many of the features here, are so unique and I think really practical and very easy to use. So overall, you have a resizable interface, which is always great. I love that. The ability to resize it based on the screen. It also means I don't have to zoom in for this video. Primarily what we have are three sections here. We have a detection section. So this is the open threshold, where you'll see here, you see an actual triggered signal here, a signal that passes above the white threshold. So you have level up and down, and then you'll see the different hits kind of coming along. We have some settings that work along with that. The decay section. So basically what you're controlling is not so much the attack time. That is sort of inherently built in and very clean and powerful, the way that they do it with the design of the plugin. So there's no attack setting per se, and we'll get into more specifics around that. You have a decay control. The decay control allows you to control the decay time differently for the sustain part of the drum versus the attack. And then you also have some alternate features here which allow you to shorten the decay time on the gate for lighter hits, and we'll get into some of that. And then there's another feature here which is called the drum leveler. So this would allow you to take a performance that's maybe a little bit inconsistent and make it more consistent. So you can pull it by percentage, lower level hits and louder level hits to a target area, which is set up here. So let's go right back to the detection section and kind of go through everything. Now, just very quickly, the Sonnox toolbar is basically the same, where you have all your copy paste settings and undo redo and all of that, and the presets that you can toggle through. There are two setups, A and B, so you can go through all of those basic things. If you click on the Sonnox banner, then this gives you some other features. You can open the user guide, etc., etc. So I won't waste time on that. So let's go through the detection section. Now, when you play something through here, and I have just a simple snare drum to start off with, and I'll show you some common problems that you run into with gates with snare, and then we'll do a little bit of tom as well, so you can kind of see it. So we'll start with the detection section. So what we'll see here is you can see the snare track right up here, and then there's a little snare build, which is kind of going to be the fun part. We'll get to work here. So if we just do this. All right, so you can see here in the first couple of parts here, the hi-hat triggered it. Right, so what I can do here, obviously I can raise the threshold above there so you can actually see the level. So if I get it above there, right, and that allows me to kind of get cleanly through. And that will work for most sections. Sometimes you'll end up with other things that kind of cut through. Okay, so now what we have here is a fill, or a build. So I'm going to bypass this for a second just so you can hear it. And those are often problems because you end up missing, or the gate ends up cutting out on the lower one. So I'll show you how we can deal with this a little more specifically. Right, so the first couple get missed. Right, so one thing I could do here is I could pull this back a little bit, see if I can capture them there. Still not quite getting it. Okay, so now there's two toms that come in and pick up there, but I don't think I was going to get below those anyway. And then there's this hat that shows up back here. All right, so I managed to avoid that. Okay, so now I got this. So I'm still missing that first hit. Now, if you see, for example, there are a couple of things here that allow me to work with this. If I have certain things, like I'm not getting enough triggers because I don't see them all, I have transient settings here, and I can make it show more or less hits. So if I have this all the way up, right, you're going to see that there's more of these little pegs or lines that kind of go along here. I'm just going to set it to the default setting because that seemed to work pretty well. But if you get too many or not enough, you don't want to get false triggers as a result. So set the sensitivity so you more or less get what you're looking for there. And then there's also a sidechain filter. And the sidechain filter, like what you'll get, is just a high-pass filter that will allow you to filter off lower frequencies that may be causing the triggers to be inaccurate or inconsistent. Okay, so now there's two layers to this, and I'm going to step back just to the previous snare drum just so we can see that first hit. So I think we're kind of missing it right there, so maybe I need to dial that in a little bit more. No, no, it's okay. It's okay. Actually, I can leave that there. All right, so I have that. Now, there's one other feature here which kind of helps with this, and that's the snare feature. So what this does is you're telling this, and this is the secondary level. So we have the first level is just set a simple threshold. This is kind of what you do with any gate, right? And you have the filter, and then you have the sensitivity to determine the trigger points, the number of trigger points. When you get to this section, now we can focus in on it. So what they've done is they've analyzed, you know, the differences between kicks and snares and toms. And for the most part, there's pretty obvious differences, but sometimes small toms can have some similar characteristics to a snare drum, etc., floor toms to a kick drum, etc. So what they've done here is if you click on this, what it does is it adds an extra layer of sensitivity to defining what would be a snare drum from a tom, right? And that way there's no misfires or mistriggers, because here you're working purely on just levels. That's your primary focus here. So once it exceeds the threshold, the gate opens up. But now if we focus it into what its intelligent engine figures is a snare drum versus being a hi-hat or some other cymbal crash or something like that, then it can ignore those hits that pass above threshold, but and create false triggers, right? Right, so in this section, and just to show you what happened here, right, so if I take this off, right, here, let me step back a second. Right, so you can see that there is right, so there's a tom there that was triggering. Now when I hit this, put the snare in there, this doesn't trigger anymore. Right, so it delineates or differentiates between what it considers a tom and what considers a snare. Now, sometimes even with these settings, this doesn't always work at its best, and you also have an additional threshold. So there are occasionally things in here where this misses. So let's just say, for example, this missed, and I wanted to take out one of these toms. Part of the way that I would do that, which is the third level of this, if I switch off of this, is to remove them manually. So for example, if I have a tom here, I can highlight the area around the tom. I could say remove matched, right, which is here. And now it grabs that. Let me grab the other one here, which is the second one. Right, and now it's grabbed those, so it has two of them. And so now when I play through the section, so what it'll do is it'll show up in red, right? So you'll see it in red there, indicating that it's you know, taking that out even though it exceeds the thresholds. So this is another where this doesn't work, and most of the time it does work, but it gives you that alternate. So you have this sort of 3 layers way, so, and it'll remember that positioning and also remove things that are similar to that as you kind of go along. So the other thing that you will get in snare drums, and let's see if I can find one here. I think there was one up here someplace, is where you get these sort of ghost notes with the snare drum. Right, so there. So you have this little thing here. We have this little roll. Right, so that's in here. So here's like and maybe your song is sort of built around that. So let's just kind of focus on that for a second. Okay, so those are what we're trying to get. Now, if I pull the threshold down, that may not work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the snare thing here. And now what you have here with the snare is an alternate threshold. And this threshold, I can pull this down, and it's kind of like a way of being more sensitive to lower level notes. Let's see if I can get it low enough. Maybe I can't. Okay. All right. So let's just say one other way to do this. There's two other ways to do this. One would be to use the option here where I learn unmatched. And try it one more time. Still not picking them up. Okay. Now that I move this down, right? All right, so what that should do, and what it didn't do there, or maybe I'm still left over. Hold on 1 second. Let me see if I can get that one more time. Okay, so that, now it's calling that 1 when it actually should be 3. So that's kind of interesting. So that little roll there. Let's listen to it. A little bit better. Not quite. I think there's two things that I have to do there within that roll. One is to go to the transient settings and find more of them. All right, so that gives me enough of them there. Now it looks like it's passing through. Let's see if this is false triggering anywhere else. All right, so then we have like some little hi-hats here. This is part of where this threshold should come in and allow me to control, you know, what those triggers are. Here I did it manually. What I should be able to do here, and this works most of the time, doesn't happen to be working perfectly here, which is to pick up that difference there. Right, because obviously that's not triggering, right? Right, with those other hi-hats. So, all right. So that should, okay, and I should be able to set that right within there, and it should be able to pick those guys up. All right, and that's not working. Okay, so what are you going to do? It worked before? Not working now. Okay, let me try to set this lower. Nope, 0 for 3. Okay, so we move on. Okay, that's the idea as described. All right, so let's focus back here in the manual anyway. All right, so let's start with this and go to the decay section, right, and work past that part. So with the decay section, what I have here is the ability to control the sustain decay. So I have an overall decay time. So I can make the decay really long. Make it really tight. Now, what I can also do is I can kind of keep the attack tight if there's a lot of bleed, and then hold out the sustain for this frequency area, right? So here from 40 hertz, maybe I'll push it up a little bit higher for the snare drum. So you could see here in that waveform display some different things here. If I want the sustain to go to a certain length, I can actually see some of the other hits that are bleeding through. And I can focus this frequency right around where that is, and that way I can preserve the sustain. So what it is kind of like a gate that actually is tighter on the higher frequencies, looser on the lower frequencies. Basically, that's the idea. Now here, there's also a percentage. So for lighter hits or softer hits, kind of like the little snare roll kind of things, I can make the decay time faster, and I could set it by a percentage here. So that way, like if you have, especially for like a tom, where it's hit lighter, the decay, it's not going to hold out or sustain as long. So you want the gate to kind of close a little bit faster. And that's the second thing. This is where gates have this sort of hysteresis controller, where they have this closed threshold kind of thing, where, you know, when it falls below, then it starts the gate closure. And then you have the gain reduction. So this determines how tightly the gate closes. Right now it's set to -40, but I could do a light gate where I have it going down just like, 10 dB or something. Right, and that's holding off for going so long because it's displaying what's going on here with this percentage. So I'll just set it back to normal. You get the basic idea there. The next thing is the gate leveler. So what this does is this allows me to control, or allows you to control, and you could bypass this section altogether if you just don't want to use it. But essentially what you have is a threshold here between loud and soft notes, wherever loud and soft notes are. And then what you're doing is you're setting a target, right, where you want those to go to, right? So this is just a threshold, what's loud and what's soft. And then we have a soft target and a loud target. So what happens here is if I set the leveling for the loud target and the low target to be 100%, it's going to push every hit up to this exact level. Where there might be some natural differences between them. Probably not. Still pretty consistent. So again, not the greatest example. If I go to the example here where I had that snare build. Right, so and I push this. Right, so I guess one of those hits is missing, but I could take the lower level here and have that up. So I could set a range basically for what the difference is between those hits. And, between low and high. So if you have like an inconsistent, you want a snare to be more consistent, like the drummer's a little bit all over the place with the levels. Obviously, this is like almost dead on, but it gives you some control in that range to kind of tighten up or pull things in. So one of the things here that's a problem here, and this sort of relative here, maybe this will open up some of the other things we've done here, is the tom. So I have a floor tom here in that same snare build section that goes up. Okay, so now what I have here is the same fill leading in. You can hear the bleed coming in, and then you have the tom that comes in. So let's see if we can. All right, so now when I set up my. Now you can see that the snares are almost the same exact volume here. So let me see if I can isolate them out by hitting the tom control here. All right, so closer. We pull the threshold up a little bit. All right, so the gate decay is quite tight, but let's just see if I can sort this out. So there's a couple ways to sort this out. One way would be to remove the snare hits altogether. So highlight the areas here where the snare comes in. Remove. So it's step, boom, boom. And then those three hits there, so remove these. All right, so now it's showing a total of 4, and now let's just see what that plays like. Okay, and then that snare hit comes through. Oh, I'm not going to go through these one by one. I suppose I could do that and remove any that trigger, because the snare is almost as loud as the tom. Okay, so going through this now, I can make some adjustments here to the decay time. So maybe I want to focus this in. Right, and you could see the snare right there, right? So if I wanted to get that out before the snare hit, you hear just the back end of the snare. Right, or if I wanted it to decay out longer and let that snare just kind of be on the back end of it. All right, so let me kind of keep the decay a little bit shorter and tighter. Right, and then I can control the frequency area that it covers. Right, and that will give me more or less bleed. Again, I can set the overall decay time. I could change it for softer hits if you have a build, how it sets the decay time, and then I have the overall gain reduction. And here again, I also have the ability to kind of work with it from a leveler position, and that's basically how you can go through. Even if you wanted to eliminate sections, except where the toms are playing, you could just kind of do like a rough edit through, and it looks like it was continuing to play all the way up to the next fill. But you could delete these other sections, and then here, rather than going through, you can have at least more refined control rather than doing just a fade out, which is going to do everything full frequency. At least here you have more control over where you want the sustain to be and what frequency area sustains. So it's a much more intelligent way of going about it. It's a very cool system. The ghost note thing there with the snare drum, I got that to work like 100 times out of 100, except for this demo. So trust me, it does work. I'm not sure what I missed in that particular one. Maybe I didn't pick the same one or something like that, and figure out the formula. But it's actually quite easy to use when you get to it. The other cool thing about this is that if you say wanted to replace these toms or replace the snare, and you set the gate up, there's a very cool feature here where you can capture. So I'm just going to capture these couple tom hits. Okay. And then, so now what I have, this drag will open up. Okay, so what this allows me to do here, and you can see what I've done here is just, let me delete it. I'll just do this just so you can see it. I can drag this right onto a track, right? So I just put it there in shuffle mode so it go right to the beginning. And now those MIDI notes, and I can define or design what MIDI notes I want it to be, right? MIDI channel and what MIDI notes, and actually draw out a MIDI file. Now I have a trigger that I can use for some other sample library if I want to replace it. So I could actually use the gate as a way to extract the triggers that I want, as opposed to the ones that I don't want, and then just capture it as a MIDI file and just drag and drop it onto a track, and then apply it, feed it into whatever your sample library is, and trigger it through battery or whatever other drum program that you have, Slate or whatever it is. So simple, right? Very powerful, a lot of uses, very well designed. I find it quick and easy to work with, to use. Nice master bypass here. Things like the leveler you can bypass individually. Very powerful, very cool, well-featured, well-designed gate specifically for drums. Very, very cool one. So there you have it. Plugin of the week. Sonnox Oxford Drum Gate.